Hey guys, welcome back to Roots Refuge Farm. Just popped out here to the high tunnel and I was going to show you guys our storm damage. Everybody keeps messaging me and asking how we ended up faring through the really bad storm the other day. This was my only real damage right here. The high tunnel, we had this door bolted down shut and it ripped loose and this door flew up. Thankfully it didn't like rip off or anything, so it's mendable. But with that, I had a bunch of pots here and they ended up getting thrown all over the place, and these bok choys right on the front just got completely shredded. There were a few other plants like out in the cottage garden that were, you know, kind of some broken pieces off, but I was about to prune them back anyway, so it really was pretty uneventful, other than being a little bit alarming while it was happening because the wind got really bad here and we lost power and all that stuff, but not for very long. I have been really admiring all of the plants out here. They're just looking so beautiful. I need to get going on using some kale because it's getting to where it's starting to be a lot. Of course, I mean, we're using it some, but obviously not enough to really make a massive difference. It's also getting to be cabbage time. I've got multiple heads forming, which is awesome. Look at this little cutie. Tiny head of cauliflower. It's mid-morning and I'm just getting outside today. I've been indoors this morning sipping on my coffee and going over my garden plans for this year. And I have pretty historically been lackadaisical, I guess. Laid back might be a more gracious way to say it, but I don't know if that's exactly accurate. Kind of lackadaisical. When it comes to planting my garden, I typically have a general idea of like what seeds I know I want to start and what I want to plant, and I kind of go from there. Depending on the spaces, I don't do really well super hemmed in, but I'm kind of challenging myself this year for at least part of the garden. I think I'm going to focus on the raised bed garden, making a more structured plan, because every year I end up getting seeds that I want to plant, and then I'll end up not planting them, or starting some plants and then not really having space for certain things. I would like to go into it a little bit more prepared and kind of hold myself to it. I'm not going to be unrealistic enough to think that I could possibly do that with my entire garden. I just don't think I have the brain capacity to like keep up with a really strict plan like that, and it would take some of the joy out of it for me. I like kind of flying by the seat of my pants and doing things and being able to be inspired by something and like make space for it on a whim. But I think maybe there's like a happy medium between how I've been doing it and maybe that really super strict hemmed in thing. Somewhere in between there, maybe I can experience the best of both worlds by structuring part of the garden and then keeping some of it kind of go with the flow. This space is a really good example of how I garden plan. I knew how much space I had. I knew about how much of each thing we could use. Like I knew we could use a lot of kale. Now some of that will probably end up going to the animals. I knew that I wanted to put cut flowers in here that next year. So I've got the sweet peas growing, and back here the ranunculus growing. Those are things that are going to stay through the spring and bloom. And a lot of these things were just plugged in where I had space for them. I mean, there's no real rhyme or reason to it. And then I left some space to succession sow. So actually this little section over here is probably going to get sown this week with more root vegetables. Right now we're starting seeds of brassicas, which a lot of these heading things are coming close to being ready to be harvested. And that means I'm going to be clearing out spaces. I've got things coming up that can go into those spaces, but it's not a real strict plan. And so I think that I probably could grow in effectiveness if I kind of pushed myself in this area. But while realistically keeping in mind, I need to keep some margin so it stays fun. I really struggle feeling like hemmed in by a hard plan. Goodness, aren't these beautiful? I love them. Beautiful purple cabbages. It's super windy out here today. Y'all, I could just walk right through here. It will not be possible in a handful of months. Oh, look at this. All the mint is starting to come back. Lots of little sprouts in here. It may freeze back again a little bit. These tiny leaves smell so nice. So this is the part I'm thinking about strictly planning for the year. You know, I tried to plant some things out here, and our first freezes were so much harder than usual that the things I planted, like these are peas, they got killed back, and they're kind of still struggling to grow. They may end up trying to take off, but I may end up pulling them out. If they're real damaged, they'll be stunted. But I think I could probably utilize this space more effectively, and of course my green stalks and just these raised beds. And it really sort of is a blank slate, because this winter we focused all of our winter growing in the high tunnels, and that is a first for me. I've always had some things going out in the garden, so to have this whole garden for the most part, I mean, there's a couple little odds and ends, like I have lemongrass that I know will come back, there's some dahlias that'll come back, so there are some areas that have perennial things in them, but for the most part this is a blank slate. I think I could grow as a gardener here. All right, let's duck in where it's warm. So yesterday I was out with Malia. She's in town, and she'd gone to visit a friend of hers down in Charleston. I went to pick her up, and we spent the day. We went to the beach and just hung out and spent quality time together for the day. And we were out shopping for her some new jeans, and my phone just starts going crazy, and I'm getting all these messages. I go on and I'm looking at my comments, and just all of a sudden I've got like 100 comments of people being like, you were just on national news. And I'm like, what? You know, I mean, the first response is like, oh God, like, why? And I actually don't watch the news like at all. And so I couldn't find it. Like I couldn't find somebody, I guess it was on Inside Edition, and I didn't have a way to look at that. And later a friend of mine actually sent me a clip where they had recorded the TV and sent it to me, and then later I guess they put the clip up. And it's funny because it spurred this whole conversation in the Friends of Roots Refuge Facebook group, because they were like, oh, surely Jess knew. And I didn't. I actually didn't know that that clip was going to be used. And that's the nature of this. I'm not upset about it. Like everybody's like, that's not okay. But for something like news, they're actually, social media content is part of the user agreement that people can take it and use it. And that's just the nature. I mean, think of how many YouTubers like take clips from other YouTubers and do reactions and things like that. I mean, you don't have to get somebody's permission to do stuff like that. And it's not upsetting to me. I know what I sign up for whenever I put my life on the internet, so it was kind of cool. I don't think that it'll lead to like any like great exposure or lots of new people. I think like maybe we had like 10 new subscribers within a 20-minute window, which isn't even that unusual. So it was just kind of like, whatever. I mean, it literally said a mom in South Carolina took refuge in her greenhouse from the storm, and it was from the last video, which, I mean, I purposefully came out here. I wasn't like ducking out of the storm, but I don't know. I was just checking on my seedlings, make sure they didn't dry out, which they didn't. And it's a good thing I came and watered them, because they could have. But look, we have lots of new babies coming up. These are all clementine cauliflower. It's like a really lovely orange cauliflower. These are kohlrabies, which I like fermenting kohlrabi in like little strips. That's probably my favorite way to use it. It also makes a really nice slaw. Right here we have some more Copenhagen cabbage, which is like a really big, thick-leaved cabbage. It's nice. Those haven't come up yet. Here's red acre cabbage, which is that big purple variety that I keep gawking at out in the tunnel. This is purple moon cauliflower, so another colorful cauliflower. Those are so dark, it's hard to even notice them. This tray right here is broccoli. Here, more clementine cauliflower, and some sweet peas, which, oh, I love sweet peas. That's for the flower. And then these are just some hen and chicks that I've had out here for a while. I need to plant them, but I'm going to wait till it warms up. Then up here, more sweet peas, more broccoli. And then here are bull's blood beets, some chamomile, which, by the way, this is Lottie Lan. I don't know how to say it properly, but it's actually Polish, I was told by viewers whenever I was starting these seeds. They commented, and it actually means golden fields, so that's cool. And then we have a lot of rutabagas right here, and calendula and calendar. That was where I mislabeled one. These are not quite sprouting yet. I don't see anything in them, probably pretty soon, maybe another 2 days. The ones at the bottom were started about 2 days before these. So depending on where you live and if you have a place to start seeds indoors, it really is kind of getting about the time to start brassicas if you live in a warm place. So for me, my last estimated frost date is around the 1st of April. The last few years we've been having freezes mid to late April. So I'm thinking of the 1st of April fairly loosely. The danger with starting your seeds too early is that they could get root bound. Like if they get so big and the weather is not permitting for you to move those plants out, you could potentially end up having to pot them up to the point that your greenhouse or your closet and grow lights or your windowsill or wherever it is that you're starting seeds cannot accommodate the plants at that size. And the danger is if you leave those plants in like a small pot, like what we typically use for seed starting is not very large. And if you end up with a really large plant in here, they can't develop the root system that plant needs really to thrive. And the risk being if they get root bound, meaning that they can't develop the roots they need and they get really tight and stunted, when you do move them out, they won't end up growing and producing the way they could have if they'd not gotten root bound. I definitely wouldn't do now for frost tender things, because by the time that's 12 to 13 weeks until the frost, if the weather permits, if we don't have another late frost. It could potentially even be like 15 weeks ahead, 16 weeks, and that would not be great. However, with brassicas, anytime you are planting without ideal infrastructure, you're taking a risk. So I have the high tunnel now, which lets me really boldly plant extra stuff because I know I've got that layer of protection. But before I had a high tunnel, I still started a wave of brassicas in early January, and I would move them out mid-March, which was usually about a month before my last frost. And if we were gonna have like an unusually cold evening, I would cover them up with sheets or frost fabric. And I grew a lot of brassicas that way. Now, if you are the sort that gets analysis paralysis and starts to worry about things to the point of talking yourself out of doing them, while you're at this point of garden planning, keep in mind that like the worst that's gonna happen is you're gonna waste some seeds and some time. But maybe it's not a complete waste if you learn, okay, that didn't work, here's what I could do differently next time. And I wanna give you probably the main piece of gardening advice that I could ever give you. Learn it for yourself. Try it for yourself. There's so much gardening information out there, and I try to be really careful when I teach people tips and tricks to say, this is what I do. This is what works for me. There is not a right way to garden. If somebody tells you that, well, I just cannot get behind that, because we live in so many, right now I am talking to people who live in so many different climates, who have so many different physical limitations or capabilities, who have such different resources, have such different time to be able to give to this, have such different needs. And there are so many factors that go into gardening and making it work. And literally, I love being able to guide people. I love being able to teach you what I know, which isn't a lot in the grand scheme of growing. I know what I've learned. I know what has worked for me and what has not worked for me. But there are plenty of you that something didn't work well for me that worked great for you. There are plenty of you that something worked amazing for me and it didn't work for you at all. So we still have to figure things out for ourselves, even if we're getting advice from someone. And the biggest takeaway for me in learning gardening with boots on the ground is that your experience will be the best teacher that you could possibly have. I don't want to be the best teacher that you have. I would like to be a good teacher more than anything. I'd love to be a great cheerleader. Ultimately, your gardening experience is what's going to give you confidence and what's going to grow you. So if you'd like to try to start some seeds early, do it. Even if you want to blow off the advice and start frost tender seeds early. I wouldn't do a ton. I do think that when someone cautions you, you should proceed with caution, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't proceed at all. Try it and see. And if you end up with root bound pots, you just take an educated risk. If you know it's a risk, if I tell you, hey, this isn't best, you know maybe you're taking a risk. So don't put all your eggs in that basket, but it doesn't mean you can't try. Because the thing is, even if you follow all the rules, even if you go to every single person that's like, here's my companion planting chart, and you need this many plants to get this many things, and you need this and you need that, here's how to garden. If they tell you these exact things and you follow them to a T, you're still gonna have things that don't work. I follow my own advice and sometimes it still doesn't work for me. Like, I swear, I still have gardening failures. Heck of a lot less than I used to, but I've had enough to not have the arrogance to think that I know exactly how to garden. I know more or less what works, and I'm not upset about it whenever something doesn't work. So my biggest piece of advice is just be your own best teacher. Let your own experiences be the #1 thing that you take as law in your garden. And be willing to grow, be willing to experiment, show up as a student, and then nothing's really wasted, which honestly just keeps it way more fun and way more lighthearted, and I wouldn't even want to garden if it wasn't fun and lighthearted. I am chomping at the bit to start 8 million seeds right now. I would love nothing more than to fill this greenhouse to the brim with growing things. One of my hesitations right now is I know Jeremiah is about to get in here and start working, and the less things that I have in his way, the better. But I also know, like, there's no reason really for me to start 8 million seeds right now. It's not what's best. And though it would probably make January me super happy to have a bunch of growing things around me, I think that late February me and early March me may be a little frustrated that I'm having to work around January Jess's projects. So I think I'll wait. So as I'm like reflecting, this is the time of my garden planning that I do a lot of reflecting. There are a couple things like I'm setting out for myself as challenges. I love to celebrate what went right, but I equally love to assess the places where I can grow. And like I said, I think I'd like to push myself to having a little more structure. Another thing this year is that I would really like to take advantage of the containers I have. I'll have a lot of these beautiful planters and of course my green stalks. And I'd like to make the most of those just for the visual appeal, but also for the sake of teaching people who only have containers to grow in. I think that would be really beneficial. I think those are my 2 big things. I remember a couple years ago my goal for the year was to stay on top of succession sowing. That was one of my big goals, like, because the previous year I'd had plans for that, and then when it came down to things being torn out or harvested, I ended up not re-sowing them in time, and I didn't feel like I made the most of my spaces. But I feel like that's something that at this point I don't really feel the need to work on as much, because with succession sowing, we successfully harvest food out of our garden throughout the year. And that's why whenever I'm looking at goals for the year, I'm not trying to make an unobtainable list. I'm giving myself just a couple of things to work towards, and that I can actually feasibly achieve and see how I feel about it. You know, I may rigidly plan this garden, stick to that throughout this 1 year, and then at the end of it say, that didn't make a difference for me. I'm going to go back to being willy-nilly. Or I may love it so much that next year my goal can be to rigidly plan more of the garden. With the containers, I may put a lot of effort into them, make them beautiful, make them awesome, really focus on that and refuse to let it fall through the cracks. And then at the end of the year go, that really wasn't worth the effort. Or I may absolutely adore it and think, I'm going to continue that. Maybe I should get more containers. So when I look at my gardening goals over previous years, it's very much like that. Some of the things I challenged myself to for a year, I decided, yeah, that's not something that's super important to me to try to hold myself to from now on. Some of the things I challenged myself to became habits and grew me as a gardener. And this year, I would say those are the 2 things. Introducing a little bit of a structured plan and being very mindful of my containers that I personally want to grow in. I would love to know what you are hoping to grow in as a gardener this year. Are you hoping to succession sow more, have more of a plan, try new things, use more of what you grow? That was one of my challenges 1 year, to really start implementing my food and making sure that every single thing I cooked throughout every single day, every meal had one aspect that came from the garden. That I would have, that challenge that 1 year, I challenged myself that every week I would do at least one preservation project. And of course now it's very much a way of life for me. But at the time it was a really big transition. So maybe that's a challenge that you are looking at. I'd love to hear what you're challenging yourself to, because I think we can all learn together. I think this could be a really great conversation. Throw your comments down in the chat. I'll be interacting there. I hope you guys all fared well in the storms, and I so appreciate you hanging out with me today. God bless you. Until next time.